The following program is a production of the Hennepin County Library.
Hello, I'm Diana Sy with The Right Agency. We're having a discussion today with author Howard Norman. You're very accomplished. You're an author, screenwriter, teacher. One of your novels, The Northern Lights, is going to be made into a film. You have a collection of short stories, Kiss in the Hotel, Joseph Conrad, a collection of Arctic folk tales, Northern tales, and there'll be a new book published in 1992, The Bird Artist. Now, all writers want to know, how did you get started? Why do you write? Were you a child writer? Did you love to read? What kinds of things put you on this particular path?
I got shuffled a lot between families when I was a little kid.
Oh.
And so I, for better or worse, developed a kind of inward life, riding on buses and trains. So I just have notebooks. It wasn't a conscious act, I don't think. But I have notebooks and doodles and stuff from when I was 6 or 7, and stories. And when I look back on them now, I realize that I was incorporating dialogue that I would hear on the trains, or things from my family into them. And I think that's one of the things that happens with writers, is that their defense against the world is to construct sentences, is basically, and that you intuitively do that, and later on you consciously do it, and if you're lucky, you get to do it for a living. So,
as a child, you were writing things.
Yeah, I was writing things. I couldn't draw, and I couldn't sing. I had a terrible singing voice, and if I would have sung on the trains, I mean, the conductors would have pummeled me. So you could sit there and write.
Well, you must have been reading then, too.
Not that much.
Okay.
I didn't come from a family where there were a lot of books around.
Oh.
Frankly, I didn't. And so local libraries were very special places. And I have a weakness for them now, because where I live in Vermont, I do a lot of work for the local libraries, little hamlet libraries, because I remember that them being places of solace, and even if you have a very remedial reading skills, there's an awful lot there, and if you have a benevolent, generous librarian, it can really help.
Isn't it helpful if somebody really encourages that and helps you find things? So now you mentioned Vermont. Now what is your background? Where did you originally grow up? Was it the East Coast?
No, not at all. I grew up in the Midwest. I was part of a split family, and so I spent a lot of time fairly early on in Canada, in Manitoba and in Ontario, and at age 16, just before my 17th birthday, I hired on to the Canadian Forestry Service. So I worked for 3 or 4 years, just a typical summer job, fire crews and things like that. And I was surrounded by Indian people, Cree and Chippewayan and Athabascan. So, I heard those languages. They aren't written. And there's probably no more context that's more urgent than on a fire crew. Because if you have to say something to somebody, you have to say it quick. Yeah. And so I was drawn in. I was attracted to those languages very early on, and
so that sort of was the beginning of the language, and then with the knowledge, you must have started hearing the stories, and that's why you wanted
slowly. You're not always sure in those villages. It was not, and never has been, and never will be, a matter of sitting down and saying, "Tell me something." These things happen rather haphazardly. You'll be riding along in a pickup truck, and somebody will be reminded of something, and they'll start telling a story about a trickster or a shaman, It's not to say that there aren't formal storytelling situations where people are, where kids are packed into a little house and somebody holds forth. That happens.
Oh.
But more often than not, it doesn't. It's just the way we would do here.
I was going to say it's very similar, yeah.
Yeah, very lackadaisical and very informal, along with the very formal hunting stories or trickster stories or stories which are cautionary tales that educate kids.
Ah, okay.
And when you learn, when you're trying to learn a native language as an outsider, you're infantilized. You begin again, linguistically at least, because and the best people to hang around with are 3, 4, or 5-year-old kids, because they're learning like you're learning.
Ah.
You know.
Well,
which is what I did.
Now you said as a teenager, did you think you would be a writer, or was this something that just kept?
I mean, I didn't think of it professionally. I just knew that it was something that didn't have a lot of romantic attachments to it. It seemed very functional. You know, that if you didn't do something with what you were thinking about, where would it go? You know, and in the cultures I was with for many years, it was into stories. Those people think narratively. They come to certain judgments about life and about history through stories. They're finely tuned and finely crafted stories. So if I had any, it's very pretentious, you know, for a 42-year-old writer to talk about their writing career, because I mean, it's not really very far along.
But obviously the years you spent listening and writing have brought you to a point where you have done several of these books.
But that's just publishing stuff. I mean, the writing, the models I had were very succinctly structured folk tales, which have structures and properties, literary properties, that don't exist in written stories. For instance, stories that where events repeat themselves, but not quite the same way each time. A Rashomon type of story. And those structures sink into your psyches in some way. So when I was first writing fiction, they would be, at best, emulations of folk tales. And I'd show them to somebody and they'd say, oh, these are nice folk tales, but they aren't yours.
Oh, I see.
You know.
Okay.
So
now, with the stories that you have written down, some of these things, were the Native Americans, or these are Canadian Indians, I'm not sure the correct term here, were they concerned about you writing them down? Were they a little bit leery of what you were doing? Did you have to be careful of that at all?
Not leery. I would say that
maybe just kind of concerned, or
it's a very paradoxical world we live in. There's no people, even in the remotest part of the Amazon, that aren't politicized in some way. And so when you start to talk about publishing folk tales, especially after spending, 11 or 12 years sitting around in villages taping life histories and so forth, then what you're really doing is you're taking something that is not in a single form. A story is told differently each time if it's oral, and you're planting it on a page, and you're fixing it in time and place. That's something to really discuss with people. There's a colonial aspect to that, if you will. You take something, you bring it over into your culture, and that represents the culture you've been with.
Yeah.
So I found that it's an ongoing, complex, ethical issue. And the only way to deal with it is, one, is to try to learn the language the best you can. And secondly, is to try to work with people who will be vigilant and watch what you're doing, and go to them and say, how do these sound to you? Does this sound right? And if they say no, you just don't publish it. But more than publishing, I mainly do things for communities. I work with translation of certain texts for grade schools and stuff like that. It stays within the community.
And now when you say this, you're talking about
Cree or
Cree, okay.
Dog Rib, Inuit, Arctic Eskimo
my.
groups. Yeah.
Well, now, so you went to college, you got a degree in...
I went
Or
erratically to college. Yeah.
But all of-
off a year to
Okay.
to work and then
That's what I
back
was
and
thinking,
back.
sure, to get material and
Yeah.
to keep in contact with
Yeah.
that. Well, your first book, correct, right, was The Northern Lights.
There were some collections of translations before that,
Okay.
but my first novel is The Northern Lights. Yeah, and that came out in 1987, and I was 38. So you get used to the publishing industry. It likes to nurture today people from age 20, or something like that. But I was not one of those
So you
people.
were, supposedly for what they were doing, it was like you were over the hill at that point. Or he's one of the older writers. Is that how they would refer to?
Perhaps.
Well, it's okay. I'm one of the
I
older
figured
agents.
whenever you started,
so.
you started, and it just didn't. I had wanted to write fiction for a long time. I was writing radio plays and stuff like that.
Okay, that's So really, part of when I mentioned screenwriting, you've done some scripts, and I was going to ask you about that. In some of the press release I received, it says ethnographic scripts.
Ethnographic films. Well, they
Or
were
films.
they were more narrations. You'd go out with a film group, and they'd spend 3 or 4 months in, say, a Greenlandic village, and then you'd be there, and then you take notes, and then when it came time to write the narration, you'd sit in a room and look at all the footage and work with the editor.
Okay.
What would you like to write about this, and so on and so forth. You've seen them on television. They were National Geographic genre of film, and I did that, and I wrote for kids films, for wildlife stuff. I wrote a film on the Chinese acrobats who visited Reykjavik in Iceland. It was paid, commissioned, freelance work.
Okay. I mean, you're doing writing, but it's also visual, which is it's a tough balance, isn't it? Sometimes.
I hardly said no to any work. I worked with a group of Japanese ornithologists in Churchill, Manitoba, who were studying tundra birds, and we lived in the Beluga Hotel for several months.
It's not shaped like a whale, is it?
It's not shaped like a whale, but you can see whales right in the Churchill River that come in to feed into fresh water. And one of those people ended up translating 2 volumes of Eskimo folktales into Japanese.
Oh my gosh! Oh.
So it was, it on a resume it would seem one thing, but when you're doing it, it was just one a freelance writer's life.
Did you travel a lot?
Yeah.
It sounds like you must have.
But within Canada and within the North.
Okay.
And with people that travel all the time.
So do you really have a writing regimen that you would do? Because it's almost like you're not really that much in solitude. It sounds like you're more participatory.
Now I am.
But did you you would get an assignment, or you would seek out an assignment, and then you would just...
This was not fiction writing, though. This was just journal keeping and field reports.
Oh, okay.
With fiction, it requires, at least for me, many days in a row to work. And I just get up early. I have a 3.5-year-old daughter, and I try to get up earlier than she does.
Yeah, that's important.
I work every day.
Okay. So like 7 days a week, or do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, 6 or 7.
Because when you have a family, it's really hard to do that sometimes.
It depends. I just work every day.
Yeah. Now, do you set so many hours or so many pages you want to get done, or just you just sit and you write until you feel it's completed to where?
I have a Calvinist streak in me, I guess. I mean, I set a limit. I'll say, you don't get lunch till 12 o'clock. Like not 5 minutes to 12.
Okay.
But 12.
But 12 o'clock. So you reward yourself for having done your work.
Oh,
Okay.
it's utterly...
You're giving yourself permission.
It's utterly, Pavlovian.
But
I just say if I get a tuna sandwich if I work from 8 to 12. Because otherwise I live on a it's not a working farm, but there's a lot to do.
I was going to ask you. Yeah.
And you there's just a lot to do in any given day.
Well, this is we're jumping around here, but I did want to get to where now you teach at the University of Maryland
Yeah.
in Washington, D.C.,
Yeah.
but your home is actually Vermont.
Yes, my home is in Vermont. I have a house there. It's on 40-some acres of land, and it is part of a land trust with a nature conservancy and other local groups. So my neighbors and I are very involved with protecting that from predator developers.
I like that.
They're one of the
term.
predators in the area.
But now it is a working farm, so
It's not.
It's
not. It
not.
used to be.
Okay.
It's just
But you still, I mean,
horses
it's still
and stuff.
taking care of a home.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
Okay.
yeah,
Now, does your wife write? Is she involved?
She's a poet.
Oh.
Her name is Jane Shore, and she's published a number of books of poems, and she teaches at George Washington University. And we have to figure out how we're going to live.
Yes.
You know, we have these jobs that pay the mortgage up in.
Yeah. and commuting
Vermont.
too,
Yeah.
and then you have
We're down there in the winters.
good idea.
Yeah.
Good choice.
It works out fine.
So then, okay, what I wanted to ask you too, we talked about screenwriting, and you mentioned that you did some scripts.
Yeah.
Now, one of the unusual things is, as an agent, I know this, you wrote The Northern Lights. Now, you did get the rights to write the screenplay for this also.
Well, what happened with that
Yeah, how did that work?
is that The Northern Lights came out, and it's just what I guess publishers like to call a middle-level book. It's a literary book. It's a first novel. It's got all the predictable, I think, predictable limitations and flaws of a first novel. However, it was a story that is placed in northern Canada and moves down to Toronto. And there was an article done by a woman named Elizabeth Marin, and she's a writer for the LA Times. And you know, as you know, the movie industry looks for publicity on books. And it came out, and then there were several people who were interested, and they came out to the house in Vermont. One guy actually had lobsters in his trunk. He came up to our house, and he went like this, and I'd never seen him before, and he opened up his trunk, and he'd brought lobsters down from Montreal. Yeah. Oh, that was quite a story. My wife left during this. She just had enough.
Now, this is somebody trying to...
Somebody tried to buy the rights.
To buy the rights.
She
So he was
left. She took
plying
off
you
to stay
with-
with friends.
Oh,
and
my.
It was a real story. I won't go into the details because
Okay.
this is family station, but he ended up sitting drunk in my living room. I looked at him through the cold air register, filming, watching one of his own films. You know, this is absolutely unembroidered.
This sounds
story.
like an LA story. You're
Absolutely,
right.
it was
You're
terrific. It was terrific. And I didn't end up working with him.
Good choice.
I liked him, but I didn't end up working with him. And finally, I went with an independent production company called Spectrum Films because these people had worked in remote areas. I liked them, and I wrote a treatment for them, not a script.
Okay. Yeah, that was...
you know, the chronology of scenes.
Now, are they? Did you find them in Canada? They are Canadian?
No, they're
Los
based
Angeles.
in Santa Monica.
Santa Monica, okay.
And
But you were also looking for who would, it sounds like a sensitivity to what you were trying to say in your work so that they would understand.
I
That's
went
real
up to Canada
important.
with them.
It's very important.
I took them up into the
Oh.
Northwest Territories, and I said, if you still like what you see, then let's go ahead. And we went up there in October of 1987, and it was very, very cold already, and took them into some fairly remote areas in Saskatchewan, up north of Pelican Narrows, which is a Cree reservation. And
Now, were they accepted? Now, this was more like they were just checking out, so they didn't take equipment and
locations and
things.
stuff.
So
Yeah.
now, how was it accepted by the people that live there, knowing that they would possibly be filming something? And
Well,
was
I
this
had found a little village, and what they did was they sent 10 copies of the novel this may not be the place they actually film it, and they may never film it. You know, you're an agent in that business.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of movies that don't get made. But they sent 10 copies of the novel, and then the filmmakers left, the producer and the director left, and I stayed. And about a week later, I went through an all-night session with the local people. It was like it was like a form of literary criticism. Everybody had opinions. Why'd you do this and why'd you do that? And you know, and it was great. It was great. It was a real
it's nice that you
hands-on.
found that, enriching rather than that
Oh, no,
awful,
they were very
they're
nice.
critiquing my work kind
Yeah.
of thing. What an adventure, though. I mean, it's most unusual. This production company really takes the time. I mean, that's
Yeah.
really nice to deal with someone.
Well,
So
they may or may not make the movie, but they've got, you know, they've got a cast signed on, and it's always a matter of money
yes,
and
yes.
of perseverance, especially in independent production
Oh,
companies.
yes.
But I like working with them, with independent production companies, because there's a lot on the line, and it's more collaborative. And
It seems to be. Film is a collaborative process anyway,
Yeah.
and it seems it does get back to that passion for your work, which is writers have to
Yeah.
have that too,
Yeah.
and to believe in that. Well, now this is a feature-length script,
The
right?
Northern
I mean,
Lights.
this is, the Northern
Yes,
Lights.
yeah.
But now also, my information is that you're going to do scripts for 2 of your stories from Kiss in the Hotel,
Yes.
Joseph
Yeah.
Conrad. Now,
well, one
that
is
was-
done and is being shot. It's in pre-production now. It's being shot in July of this year.
Now, these are short stories, so
Yeah.
this is not. Is this like an hour?
No, this is
Or-
this is a feature length. It's an hour and a half
Oh, it
film.
would be okay.
And it the one that's being shot this summer is called 3D. It's based on a short story, and it takes place in the early 1950s in a small town in Indiana. And it's during the McCarthy hearings. And it's an economic time not unlike what we have now. And there was a little town in northern Indiana called Mishawaka that my oldest friend lives in. And I talked to a guy there once visiting his family who ran a little movie theater and tried a rather frantic version of venture capitalism. As his theater was going under, he decided to run a 3D movie, and which is true, and all hell broke loose. They were picketing, and they
My gosh.
their thinking was, some people's thinking was that it was a McCarthy plot. Yeah, and the picket signs were
gosh.
great. I mean, they were terrific. Down with 3D. 3D is communist. You know.
Interesting. Very, very
So that's at
interesting.
the center of the
The
film.
fear of something new again, something unusual again. Well, okay, we talked about that, but now that is in Kiss in the Hotel, Joseph Conrad.
Yes.
Now, is the title in that book 3D, or is
No,
it?
the title in the book is Laughing and Crying.
Okay.
The title story is a film that I just finished a script for called The Hotel Joseph Conrad.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, a lot of these have come out of researching nonfiction films. When because this film will take place in Halifax, and I guess the seed for that was going to a rather shabby hotel in Halifax, in which I got in to the hotel very late at night, so late that I hardly even turned on the light in the room. I just fell asleep on the bed, and when I woke up, I realized that the wallpaper on one of the walls was entirely old book covers. There were about 7 or 8 covers of Joseph Conrad's novels.
Okay.
And I just thought that was wonderful. So in the film, all the walls on the hallways are completely pages from Joseph Conrad's novels.
That's great.
It's just totally nuts.
Well, I did read that. I was able to read that story. It was
Yeah.
it was wonderful.
Yeah. So that's what we're doing. I mean, hopefully we'll be doing next year.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, now you would have to take a lot of time to really flesh out those characters.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's a whole different genre. I
Yeah.
mean, writers who mope around and complain, and they say, "Look what they did to my story," and I mean, it's all justified. But at the same time, it's a different genre. You have to do something different.
And I think once people, if they read a novel and then look at a film, they understand you cannot possibly put all those characters in there, and you have to give an essence of it,
Yeah.
a feel for it rather than the total, because
Some
it's
movies
just
do
too
it. I mean, some
It's
seem to.
But it's very
pretty good.
hard. We both know
Yeah.
it's just extremely hard. You have to work
Yeah.
very hard at that.
Yeah.
I wanted to get into some of your teaching. You said you don't do that much, but still the fact that you do teach screenwriting, you know about scripts. Any writer who walks into and deals with an agent like me,
Yeah.
or dealing with any producers, any people in Los Angeles, the fact that you've already written screenplays and know about it, that will open doors, because a lot of times, don't you think, they think, okay, they know how to do it, but maybe this is a fresh approach. You know, they know the mechanics.
Yeah.
But now when you teach this, I mean,
Well, I teach in the
Tell me
writing
about
program at Maryland, which is I have a graduate fiction writing course and a screenwriting course.
oh my.
The screenwriting course, on occasion, is open to the community as well. And those people that come in from the community outside of academia strike me as, with some exceptions, to be writing the most interesting scripts and the most absurd,
Yeah.
and especially the more autobiographical ones, which, you know, there's delusions of grandeur,
Yes.
you know.
Yes, I do know.
I found that with my limited experience is that most of the people that send in scripts to be looked at to see if they'll be in the screenwriting course are people who commute long distances every day. And you know, they have a lot of time to make up
Oh.
things. And there's a vicariousness to them, you know.
see. Sure.
And a lot of them have, I mean, not all that many, but some have to do with driving on the highway into Washington and looking out and seeing somebody in another car, you know, and these fantasies.
Making up stories,
Oh,
yeah.
it's just very funny, you know. Well, I don't take those people into my writing course.
Well, that's a good
I know
choice.
how that sounds, but it's.
Well, but they're not ready yet. They're not there yet. And
Yeah.
what I did want to say too is now, quickly before we have to leave here, your next book coming out is The Bird Artist.
Yes, it's a novel, and it's set in Newfoundland in 1911, and it's based on a little story that I heard up there about a guy who was a bird artist, and you know, very obscure, and he got involved with a murder, and it's venturing out into a territory I haven't done before.
Ah.
So it's almost done.
But you welcome those challenges then.
Yeah, sure. Oh, you crave them.
I
Yeah.
think so too.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you very much for
Thanks for
joining
having
us.
me
It was
here.
very informative, very exciting. I wish you a lot of luck.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us for our discussions with.
A presentation of the Hennepin County Library.